In this era, the understanding of the human mind is rudimentary. At best, the brain is still largely a black box, its intricate workings a mystery. Illnesses of the mind are often attributed to a myriad of vague causes: moral weakness, a sedentary lifestyle, overstimulation, or even a literal imbalance of humors, a concept dating back to ancient Greece that somehow still clung on. You might be told you simply need to pull yourself together, or that a good walk in the fresh air will cure what ails you. The prevailing belief is that such mental afflictions are largely a matter of character, rather than a complex interplay of biology, environment, and psychology. It's a bit like trying to fix a complex computer virus with a stern talking to. You are witnessing a period of transition, where old ideas about moral failings are slowly giving way to new, albeit flawed, biological explanations. The Victorian medical establishment, for all its limitations and occasional cruelty, was genuinely trying to alleviate suffering. Their methods, seen through a modern lens, might appear shocking and misguided, but they were born of the best available knowledge and the desperate need to find answers for conditions that baffled them. The electric current, once a mere curiosity, became a symbol of their evolving understanding, a powerful, if blunt, instrument in their quest to mend the broken mind. The journey through the Victorian approach to depression continues, revealing the complex interplay of scientific ambition, societal pressures, and the enduring quest for healing. The symptoms you experience are dismissed, misunderstood, or even stigmatized. Your sleepless nights are seen as a lack of discipline, your loss of appetite as a refusal to eat, your pervasive sadness as a moral failing. There's little to no empathy for your internal struggle. Instead, you're met with well-meaning but ultimately unhelpful advice. Or worse, a quiet judgment. The very act of admitting your internal turmoil is often seen as a weakness, something to be hidden away, lest it reflect poorly on your family or social standing. You become adept at masking your true feelings, presenting a composed facade to the world while your inner self slowly unravels. You've seen the grand lecture halls, heard the theories of nervous force and brain congestion, and understood how the Victorian medical establishment rationalized their shocking therapies. But what was it truly like to be on the receiving end of these electric currents? How did society, and with its rigid norms and burgeoning public sphere, perceive these radical interventions? Now, Tanya, you're about to step out of the physician's study and into the shoes of the patient, to experience the physical and psychological realities of electrotherapy, and to witness how the public grappled with this unsettling new approach to the troubled mind. A common historical fact is that Victorian society, despite its advancements, often viewed mental illness through a moralistic lens, associating it with personal failing or a lack of self-control rather than a medical condition. This moralistic perspective meant that treatments often focused on discipline, moral instruction, and attempts to shock the individual back to normalcy. You might find yourself subjected to strict routines, forced exercise, or even religious instruction, all aimed at correcting what was perceived as a deviation from proper conduct. It's a bit like trying to fix a broken leg by telling it to walk straight. Imagine the moments leading up to a session. The knot in your stomach tightens. You've been through this before, perhaps several times, and the memory of the jolt, the involuntary muscle contractions, the strange buzzing in your head, is still vivid. You might be led to a small, private room, or perhaps a more open ward in an asylum, where other patients watch with a mixture of fear and detached curiosity. The air is charged, not just with electricity, but with unspoken anxieties. You are asked to sit, or sometimes to lie down, on a wooden chair or bed. The cold metal of the electrodes a stark contrast to your clammy skin. It's like waiting for a really unpleasant dentist appointment, but instead of a drill, it's a lightning bolt. The concept of nerves becomes a catch-all explanation for a host of ailments, both physical and mental. You might be diagnosed with neurasthenia, a fashionable term for a condition characterized by fatigue, anxiety, headaches, and, yes, depression. This diagnosis, while offering a seemingly scientific label, still doesn't provide any real understanding or effective treatment. It just means you have bad nerves, which is about as helpful as saying you have bad feelings. A common historical fact is that patients undergoing electrotherapy in the Victorian era often experience significant physical discomfort, including muscle spasms, pain at the electrode sites, and a general sense of unease. You feel the dampness of the sponges as they are pressed against your skin, sometimes on your temples, sometimes on your neck, or even along your spine. The attendant or physician adjusts the wires, their movements precise, almost ritualistic. Then comes the instruction, ready, or perhaps just a silent nod. And then the current. It's not the gentle tingle of the earliest experiments. This is a more substantial jolt, a sudden, powerful sensation that makes your body stiffen, your breath catch in your throat, your muscles contract, pulling your limbs involuntarily. You might feel a sharp, biting pain where the electrodes meet your skin, or a deep, unsettling vibration within your skull. As the century progresses, however, a new fascination emerges: electricity. The invisible force that powers the telegraph and illuminates the streets begins to capture the imagination of scientists and physicians alike. It's seen as a mysterious, potent energy, capable of everything from sending messages across continents to, perhaps, re-energizing a flagging human spirit. The idea that this powerful, unseen force could somehow rewire the brain or stimulate dormant faculties begins to take hold. It's a bit like when everyone thought crypto was going to solve all the world's problems. New technology, big promises. The duration of the shock might be brief, just a few seconds, or it could be prolonged, lasting for several minutes, depending on the physician's protocol and the patient's tolerance. You are acutely aware of every second, counting them in your head, waiting for the release. When the current is finally cut, there's a moment of residual tingling, a lingering sense of disorientation. You might feel lightheaded, your heart pounding. Some patients reported feeling a temporary clarity, a sudden lifting of the melancholic fog, however fleeting. Others felt only exhaustion, nausea, or a worsening of their anxiety. It's a bit like hitting your funny bone, but for your entire nervous system, and the funny part is debatable. You hear whispers of this new electrotherapy. It's not yet the refined, controlled procedure of later decades, but a crude, often experimental application of electrical currents. Early devices are cumbersome, often involving large batteries or hand-cranked generators, producing unpredictable jolts. The theory, however vague, is that the electric current can stimulate dormant nerves, improve circulation, or simply shock the system out of its melancholic state. It's a leap of faith, born of desperation and a burgeoning belief in the power of this new, mysterious force. The psychological impact of these sessions was profound. For some, the sheer intensity of the experience was a form of shock therapy in itself, a powerful interruption to their depressive state. The novelty, the drama of the treatment, might have instilled a sense of hope, a belief that something truly powerful was being done to help them. This psychological effect, often referred to today as a placebo response, was likely a significant factor in any reported improvements. You might cling to that fleeting moment of clarity, that brief respite from the gloom, as a sign that the treatment was working, even if the overall improvement was minimal. The early applications are often more about sensation than science. You might be given a galvanic bath, where electrodes are placed in the water around you, sending mild currents through your body. Or perhaps you're subjected to fairdization, where a vibrating coil produces a rapidly alternating current, applied directly to your skin or muscles. The sensation is unsettling, a strange tingling, a jolt that makes your muscles contract involuntarily. It's not necessarily painful, but it's certainly not comfortable. It's like a really aggressive massage, but with more buzzing and less relaxation. However, for many, the experience was deeply traumatic. The feeling of being subjected to an uncontrolled force, the involuntary physical reactions, and the lack of understanding about what was actually happening could be terrifying. You might develop a profound fear of the electric room, dreading each session. The sense of helplessness, of your body being manipulated by an external force, could exacerbate feelings of anxiety and loss of control, particularly for those already struggling with mental fragility. It's like being forced to ride a very unpredictable and painful roller coaster every day. A unique and lesser-known detail from this period is the use of electric brushes, or electric hairbrushes. which were essentially brushes with embedded electrodes that delivered mild shocks to the scalp, believed to stimulate hair growth and nervous energy. Imagine your morning routine involving not just brushing your hair, but also giving yourself a mild electrical jolt. The idea was that by stimulating the nerves in the scalp, one could invigorate the entire nervous system, thereby alleviating symptoms of depression or fatigue. It sounds more like a parlor trick than a medical treatment, but in an era fascinated by electricity, such devices found a market. Public perception of electrotherapy was a complex mix of fascination, hope, and apprehension. On one hand, the Victorians were deeply impressed by the power and mystery of electricity. It was seen as a symbol of progress, a force that could conquer the unknown. This public enthusiasm translated into a general willingness to believe in its therapeutic potential. Newspapers and popular magazines often carried sensationalized accounts of electric cures, fueling public curiosity and a desire for these cutting-edge treatments. You might read glowing testimonials, carefully curated to highlight miraculous recoveries, further cementing the belief in electricity's power. The promise of electricity, however, is intoxicating. For a society grappling with unseen ailments, the idea of a visible, tangible force that could seemingly fix the problem was incredibly appealing. It offered a sense of control, a belief that even the most intractable mental conditions could be brought to heal by the power of science. This optimism, however, often outpaced the actual understanding of how electricity affected the human brain. On the other hand, there was a quiet undercurrent of fear and skepticism. The idea of sending electricity through the human body, particularly the brain, was unsettling to many. Whispers of patients being harmed or experiencing severe side effects circulated. The association of electrotherapy with asylums, places often viewed with dread and suspicion, also contributed to a certain unease. While some embraced it as a modern marvel, others viewed it with a cautious eye, wondering if the cure was worse than the disease. It's like when a new diet trend comes out. Some people jump right in. Others wait to see if anyone grows a third eye. Historians still debate whether the popularity of electrotherapy treatments in the Victorian period was due to a genuine belief in their efficacy or to the fascination with new technology and the lack of effective alternatives. This academic debate highlights the complex motivations behind the adoption of such radical therapies. Was it genuine medical conviction, or simply the allure of a novel technology and a desperate search for answers? The answer likely lies in a blend of both. But for you, the patient, it meant being subjected to treatments that were, at best, experimental, and at worst, terrifying. You live in a time when the line between legitimate medical practice and outright quackery is often blurred. Advertisements for electric belts, electric corsets, and electric liniments promise cures for everything from rheumatism to impotence, all powered by the miraculous force of electricity. While these are often little more than snake oil, their existence reflects the widespread public fascination and belief in electricity's therapeutic potential. It's a wild west of medical innovation, where anyone with a battery and a bold claim could set up shop. A unique and lesser-known detail from this period is the phenomenon of electrical quackery. With the public's fascination with electricity, countless charlatans emerged, selling dubious electric belts, electric brushes, and electric liniments that promised to cure everything from nervous debility to baldness, often with little to no actual electrical current or therapeutic effect. These devices, advertised aggressively in newspapers, preyed on the desperation of the sick and the public's lack of scientific understanding. Imagine seeing an advertisement promising to recharge your vital energies with a simple electric sock. It highlights the fine line between legitimate for the time medical practice and outright fraud. The Victorian era, for all its proper facades, was a time of immense internal struggle, both for individuals and for society as a whole. The rigid social structures, the rapid pace of change, and the burgeoning understanding of the human body all contributed to a climate where mental distress was prevalent, yet poorly understood. The initial forays into electric shock therapy were born out of this vacuum, a desperate attempt to apply a powerful new technology to an ancient problem. You are at the very beginning of this journey, a journey that will take you through the chilling realities of asylum life, the evolving theories of the medical establishment, and the profound impact of these treatments on the lives of those who endured them. The stage is set for a shocking chapter in medical history, one where the light bulb wasn't the only thing getting a jolt. The experience of patients also varied significantly based on their social class and gender. Wealthier individuals might receive treatment in private clinics, with more personalized attention and perhaps slightly more refined equipment. Women, particularly those diagnosed with hysteria or nervousness, were often subjected to electrotherapy, sometimes with a paternalistic view that their mental distress was linked to their delicate female constitution or reproductive organs. The unique detail about uterine congestion from the previous section comes to mind here. For working-class individuals or those in public asylums, the treatment was likely more impersonal, more coercive, and less focused on individual well-being. You felt the pervasive gloom of the Victorian era, the misunderstanding of melancholia, and the burgeoning, almost mystical, fascination with electricity. Now, you're about to step into the very early laboratories and clinics where this invisible force, electricity, was first tentatively, and sometimes terrifyingly, applied to the human body in an attempt to alleviate suffering. This isn't the refined, controlled science of today. It's a wild, experimental frontier, where curiosity often outpaced caution, and the lines between medicine, physics, and showmanship were incredibly blurred. The lack of patient autonomy was a pervasive issue. Consent, as we understand it today, was rarely obtained in a meaningful way, especially for those deemed mentally incapacitated. You might not have been given a choice, simply told that this was the prescribed course of action. This power imbalance, combined with the intimidating nature of the treatment, contributed to a sense of disempowerment and vulnerability for the patient. You were a passive recipient of a powerful intervention with little voice in your own care. Imagine the scene: a dimly lit room, perhaps in a physician's private practice or a university laboratory. The air is thick with the scent of ozone, a sharp metallic tang that hints at the powerful forces at play. In the center of the room stands a contraption that looks more like a science fair project than a medical device, a large, hand-cranked electrostatic generator. Its glass plates spinning with a faint crackle, building up a charge. Wires snake across the floor, connecting to various metal objects, a Leyden jar for storing charge. Perhaps a medical battery consisting of multiple voltaic cells. You feel a nervous anticipation, a mix of hope and trepidation, as you realize you are about to become a subject in one of these pioneering and, frankly, rather alarming experiments. It's like being the first person to try a new roller coaster that looks like it was assembled with spare parts from a junkyard. Historians still debate whether Victorian patient accounts of electrotherapy accurately reflect its effectiveness, or whether they were influenced by expectations, the placebo effect, and social pressure to report improvement. This academic debate highlights the challenge of interpreting historical patient accounts. Were their reports of feeling better a genuine physiological response, a powerful placebo effect, or simply a desire to please their doctors and be released from treatment? The subjective nature of mental illness, combined with the lack of objective measures, makes it incredibly difficult to definitively assess the true impact of these early electric shocks from the patient's perspective. The public's understanding of mental illness also shaped their perception of electrotherapy. If depression was seen as a nervous debility or a lack of vital energy, then a treatment that visibly stimulated the nerves and delivered a powerful jolt of energy seemed logically appealing. The dramatic nature of the treatment itself might have been perceived as evidence of its potency, a visible demonstration that something significant was being done to combat the unseen enemy within the mind. It was a time when the spectacle of medicine was almost as important as its efficacy. Hey guys, tonight we're taking a deep, somewhat unsettling dive into a period often romanticized for its elegance and innovation, but which also harbored some truly bewildering approaches to the human mind. Imagine, if you will, a time when the very air seemed to hum with a certain melancholic weight. A period where the human spirit, when dimmed by what we now call depression, was met with methods that might make your modern sensibilities quite literally tingle. We're talking about the Victorian era, and specifically, how they used to treat depression with electric shocks. Honestly, if you thought your phone charger gave you a jolt, you probably wouldn't have survived a Victorian therapy session. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are a silent witness to this complex interplay of personal experience and public perception. The Victorian era, with its blend of scientific ambition and societal anxieties, created a unique environment for the adoption of electrotherapy. For you, the patient, it was a terrifying, often painful, and deeply unsettling journey into the unknown. For the public, it was a source of both wonder and apprehension, a testament to the powerful, yet poorly understood, forces that governed both the physical and mental worlds. The shocking legacy of these treatments continues to unfold, revealing the human cost of a desperate search for answers in the face of profound suffering. A common historical fact is that early applications of electricity in medicine, preceding the Victorian era but gaining significant traction during it, often involved static electricity generated by friction machines or rudimentary voltaic piles. These weren't about shocking the brain directly, but rather about applying a general electrical stimulus to the body. You might be seated on an insulated stool or even suspended from the ceiling by silk cords to ensure you were completely isolated from the ground. Then a physician, often more of a physicist at heart, would approach you with a metal rod, or perhaps a glass tube, connected to the generator. As the rod neared your skin, you'd feel the hairs on your arm stand on end, a faint crackling sound, and then a distinct, if mild, static shock. It's less like a modern medical procedure and more like a very elaborate, slightly painful party trick. You've endured the jolts, felt the public's mixed gaze, and understood the patient's harrowing experience of early electrotherapy. The fascination with electricity, however, wasn't confined to the physician's office or the asylum ward. As the Victorian era progressed and the technology became slightly more refined, this powerful force began to seep into everyday life, giving rise to a bewildering array of electrotherapy devices, some legitimate, many dubious, all promising to harness the electric cure for a host of ailments, including your persistent melancholia. The theories behind these early applications were incredibly vague and often based on philosophical rather than scientific principles. Some believed that electricity could rebalance the body's vital fluids, or animal spirits. Others thought it could stimulate sluggish nerves, improve circulation, or simply provide a powerful, invigorating jolt to a system deemed stagnant by melancholia. There was no understanding of neurotransmitters, brainwaves, or even the precise pathways of the nervous system. It was a grand, sweeping hypothesis: electricity is powerful. The body is complex. Therefore, electricity must be able to fix the body. It's like saying because cars have wheels and trains have wheels, you can drive your car on train tracks. Not quite. Imagine stepping into a bustling exhibition hall, perhaps the Great Exhibition of 1851 or a smaller, specialized medical fair later in the century. The air buzzes, not just with conversation, but with the faint hum and crackle of electrical apparatus. Gleaming brass, polished wood, and intricate wiring are on display, showcasing the latest marvels of electrical engineering applied to medicine. This isn't just about professional treatment anymore. It's about the democratization of electricity, the promise of self-administered cures, and the burgeoning industry of health technology. It's like walking into a modern tech expo, but instead of smart home devices, it's all about shocking yourself better. You might be asked to hold metal handles connected to the electrical apparatus, or electrodes might be applied directly to your skin, perhaps moistened with salt water to improve conductivity. The sensation would vary depending on the device and the operator's skill or lack thereof. Sometimes it would be a gentle tingling, a buzzing sensation that permeated your limbs. Other times, it would be a sharper, more sudden jolt, causing your muscles to twitch involuntarily. The physician would observe your reactions intently, noting any changes in your demeanor, your pulse, or your reported feelings. You're not just a patient, you're a living, breathing meter for their experimental currents. A common historical fact is that the latter half of the 19th century saw a proliferation of commercially available electrotherapy devices, ranging from large clinical machines to smaller, portable units marketed for home use. You might see impressive, cabinet-sized machines designed for hospitals, featuring multiple dials and switches and a tangle of wires, promising precise control over galvanic and faradic currents. These were the workhorses of the institutional electrotherapist, capable of delivering a range of electrical stimuli, from mild tingling to powerful muscle contractions. Their imposing presence alone might have instilled a sense of awe, or perhaps dread, in those who saw them. These early experiments were often conducted with a sense of wonder and excitement, a belief that electricity held the key to unlocking many of medicine's mysteries. Physicians would publish their findings, often anecdotal, in medical journals, describing cases where patients reported feeling more lively, less morose, or experiencing a temporary alleviation of their symptoms. These reports, however unscientific by modern standards, fueled further experimentation and cemented electricity's place as a legitimate, albeit poorly understood, therapeutic agent. Then there were the more portable devices, often marketed directly to the public. Imagine a small, elegant wooden box, perhaps no larger than a cigar box, containing a miniature induction coil and a few dry cell batteries. This was your personal medical battery, complete with a pair of insulated handles or small electrodes. The accompanying instruction manual would promise relief from nervous debility, headaches, rheumatism, and, of course, your melancholia. The idea was that you could self-administer mild electrical currents in the comfort of your own home, a convenient and discreet way to combat your internal struggles. It's like a DIY therapy kit, but with more potential for accidental shocks. A unique and lesser-known detail from this period is the concept of electric sleep, or hypnotic electrification. Some practitioners believed that by applying very mild, continuous electrical currents to the head, they could induce a trance-like state or a form of artificial sleep, which they thought would be therapeutic for nervous disorders. Imagine lying there, electrodes gently placed on your temples, a faint current buzzing through your head as the physician attempts to guide you into a restorative, electrically induced slumber. It sounds like something out of a steampunk novel, a strange blend of nascent science and almost mystical belief. The marketing for these devices was often sensational and hyperbolic. Advertisements in newspapers and magazines featured testimonials from seemingly cured individuals, often accompanied by engravings of happy, revitalized Victorians. The language was filled with promises of restored vitality, invigorated nerves, and a return to mental vigor. These ads played on the public's fascination with electricity and their desperate search for remedies for ailments that traditional medicine often failed to address. You might find yourself drawn to these promises, a flicker of hope ignited by the prospect of a simple, at-home solution. The dangers, of course, were present, though often underestimated. Unregulated currents could cause burns, muscle spasms, and even cardiac arrest in extreme cases. The lack of standardized dosages or safety protocols meant that each session was a gamble. You might hear stories, hushed whispers among patients, of individuals who experienced severe discomfort, or whose conditions seemed to worsen after electrical treatment. Yet the desperation for relief and the prevailing belief in electricity's potential often outweighed these risks. The underlying theories, even for these consumer devices, remained vague. The general idea was that electricity could stimulate sluggish nerves, improve circulation, or simply provide a general tonic effect on the nervous system. Some devices claimed to generate ozone or vitalizing currents that would purify the blood and invigorate the mind. It was a blend of genuine scientific curiosity, wishful thinking, and outright quackery, all wrapped up in a shiny, new technological package. It's like buying a brain-boosting supplement today that promises to make you a genius. But it's mostly just sugar and caffeine. The public fascination with electricity also played a significant role. Demonstrations of electrical phenomena were popular attractions, with audiences marveling at sparks and shocks. This public enthusiasm translated into a willingness to embrace electrical treatments, even if their mechanisms were unclear. If electricity could light up a city, surely it could light up a darkened mind. This popular perception, combined with the medical community's growing interest, created fertile ground for the proliferation of electrotherapy. A unique and lesser-known detail from this era is the invention of electric corsets and electric hairbrushes. which were not just marketed for beauty, but also for their supposed therapeutic effects on nervous disorders. The electric corset, for example, contained small batteries and wires woven into the fabric, designed to deliver a continuous, mild current to the wearer's torso, believed to alleviate nervous exhaustion and female complaints that were often linked to depression. Imagine the subtle hum and faint tingling sensation accompanying you throughout your day, all in the name of mental wellness. These devices highlight the pervasive belief in electricity's almost magical powers, even in the most intimate aspects of Victorian life. Historians still debate whether the early improvements reported from electrotherapy were a placebo effect or the result of genuine, albeit nonspecific, physiological stimulation. This academic debate highlights the difficulty in assessing the true efficacy of these early treatments. Was it the sheer novelty and psychological impact of the intervention that made patients feel better? Or was there a genuine, albeit poorly understood, physiological effect? The answer is complex, but for the patient, any perceived relief, however fleeting, was a welcome respite from the crushing weight of depression. You also see the emergence of early medical batteries, portable devices that allowed for more controlled, though still rudimentary, application of electrical currents. These were often used by physicians in their private practices, or even sold directly to the public for home use, promising relief from a variety of ailments, including nervous complaints. Imagine a small wooden box filled with copper and zinc plates immersed in acid, generating a continuous current. It's a far cry from the sleek, precise devices of today, but it represented a significant step towards making electrotherapy more accessible. The ease of access to these devices meant that electrotherapy moved beyond the confines of the medical profession and into the hands of the general public. Anyone with enough disposable income could purchase a medical battery and experiment with self-treatment. This led to a wide range of applications, from genuine attempts at alleviating symptoms to purely recreational use, with people simply enjoying the novel sensation of a mild electric current. It was a bit like the early days of home computing. Everyone wanted one, even if they weren't entirely sure what to do with it. These early electrical experiments, for all their crudeness and lack of scientific rigor, laid the groundwork for future developments. They established the concept that electricity could indeed have an effect on the human body, even if the precise nature of that effect was unknown. They sparked curiosity, encouraged further investigation, and slowly began to chip away at the purely moralistic explanations for mental illness. You are a participant in this nascent scientific journey, a living testament to humanity's desperate, often misguided, but ultimately persistent quest to understand and alleviate the suffering of the mind. The sparks are flying both literally and figuratively as the Victorians begin their shocking journey into the treatment of depression. However, the lack of regulation and scientific oversight meant that many of these devices were ineffective, and some were potentially dangerous. The currents delivered were often inconsistent, and the claims made by manufacturers were rarely backed by scientific evidence. You might purchase such a device, use it diligently for weeks, and find no improvement in your melancholia, leading to further disappointment and a deeper sense of hopelessness. The promise of a quick fix often led to prolonged suffering. You've experienced the early, often crude, electrical experiments, the static shocks, and the vague theories that powered them. The fascination with electricity as a medical tool is undeniable, but it's still largely an experimental curiosity. Now, as the Victorian era matures, and scientific understanding, however limited, begins to refine itself. You're about to witness the transition from mere electrical jolts to something more formalized, more systematic, the evolution of electric shock into what was then considered a legitimate, albeit still terrifying, therapy. The rise of these devices also fueled the ongoing debate within the medical community. While some physicians embraced them as legitimate tools, others viewed them with skepticism, concerned about their efficacy and the potential for misuse by unqualified individuals. The line between legitimate electrotherapy and outright quackery became increasingly blurred, making it difficult for both patients and practitioners to distinguish between genuine therapeutic potential and mere charlatanism. Imagine the shift in atmosphere. The dimly lit experimental room gives way to a more clinical setting, perhaps a dedicated electrotherapy ward in a hospital, or a specialized room in a physician's office. The hand-cranked generators are being replaced by more sophisticated, though still imposing, machines. These devices, often powered by early dynamos or improved battery arrays, could deliver more consistent and, crucially, more powerful currents. The air still carries that faint ozone tang, but now it's mixed with a sense of grim purpose. You're no longer just an experimental subject. You're a patient undergoing a prescribed course of treatment. It's like moving from a garage band concert to a proper, but still incredibly loud, rock show. Historians still debate whether the popularity of home electrotherapy devices reflected the public's growing confidence in science and technology, or a sign of desperation in the face of incurable diseases. This academic debate highlights the complex motivations behind the public's embrace of these devices. Was it a genuine, albeit naive, belief in the power of progress, or a desperate grasping at straws in the absence of effective medical solutions? The answer likely lies in a combination of both, reflecting the unique anxieties and aspirations of the Victorian age. You might also encounter electro-medical institutes or galvanic parlors that sprang up in major cities, offering a range of electrical treatments to the public. These establishments, often more akin to spas than medical clinics, would provide various forms of electrotherapy, from full-body electric baths to localized applications for specific ailments. They catered to a clientele seeking both genuine relief and the fashionable novelty of electrical treatment, further blurring the lines between healthcare and entertainment. It's like a modern wellness center, but instead of crystal healing, it's all about the volts. A common historical fact is that by the latter half of the 19th century, the use of galvanic and faradic currents became more standardized, with physicians attempting to apply specific types of electricity to particular parts of the body, moving beyond general stimulation. This was a significant step. Instead of just shocking your whole body, doctors began to target specific areas, believing that localized application would yield better results for specific ailments. You might find electrodes, often moistened sponges or metal plates, applied directly to your head, neck, or spine. The idea was to influence the nerve centers or brain cells directly, though their understanding of these structures was still incredibly basic. The sheer variety and widespread availability of these electrotherapy devices underscore the Victorian era's profound fascination with electricity and its potential to unlock the mysteries of the human body and mind. For you, the patient, it represented a double-edged sword, the promise of a cure, but also the risk of disappointment, exploitation, and further suffering. The hum and crackle of these machines, whether in a grand hospital or a humble home, became a defining sound of the era's desperate, yet pioneering, quest to mend the broken spirit. The shocking journey continues as electricity, once a scientific curiosity, becomes a household word in the treatment of depression. The sensation is no longer just a mild tingle. With stronger currents, you experience a more pronounced muscular contraction, a sudden jolt that makes your body stiffen involuntarily. If the electrodes are placed near your head, you might feel a peculiar buzzing inside your skull, a strange pressure, or even a flash of light behind your eyes. The procedure is often accompanied by a sense of dread, a feeling of helplessness as the current courses through you. You might clench your teeth, your hands gripping the sides of the chair, bracing yourself for the inevitable jolt. It's a bit like being forced to drink really strong coffee, but instead of caffeine, it's pure electricity. And you can't say no. You've seen the dazzling array of electrotherapy devices, from imposing clinical machines to the humble medical battery in your own home. The promise of an electric cure for your melancholia and countless other ailments seemed to permeate the very air of Victorian society. But as the initial fascination with this new technology began to settle, a quieter, more critical voice started to emerge. This is the era where scientific scrutiny, however nascent, began to challenge the bold claims of electrotherapy, and skepticism, both within the medical community and among the public, started to chip away at the electric dream. Physicians, now more confident in their understanding of electricity, or at least their ability to control it, began to develop protocols. They would measure the current, the duration of the application, and the frequency of sessions. The goal was no longer just to shock the system, but to deliver a therapeutic dose of electricity, tailored, they believed, to your specific condition. You might undergo daily sessions, or perhaps 3 times a week, for several weeks or even months. It was a commitment, a prolonged engagement with a treatment that was both unsettling and, for many, deeply uncomfortable. Imagine the hushed, often tense atmosphere of a medical conference. It's the late 19th century, and while some physicians still enthusiastically champion electrotherapy, others are beginning to raise pointed questions. The gleaming brass and polished wood of the electrical apparatus are still impressive, but the real-world results, for many, are proving inconsistent or simply non-existent. The initial wonder is giving way to a more pragmatic and sometimes cynical assessment. You might hear learned gentlemen debating, their voices rising and falling, as they present conflicting case studies and challenge each other's methodologies. It's like a really intense online forum debate, but with more formal attire and fewer emojis. The theories evolved, becoming slightly more sophisticated, though still far from accurate. Some believe that electricity could re-educate the nervous system, forcing it out of its melancholic patterns. Others theorize that it could improve blood flow to the brain, or stimulate the production of vital nerve force. The language used by doctors became more technical, filled with terms like nervous excitability, cerebral congestion, and galvanic currents, lending an air of scientific legitimacy to what was still largely an empirical trial and error approach. A common historical fact is that despite its widespread use, the scientific evidence for the efficacy of Victorian electrotherapy was largely anecdotal and lacked rigorous, controlled studies. This was a major point of contention. While individual practitioners might report miraculous cures, there was no systematic way to prove that these improvements were directly due to the electricity, rather than other factors like the placebo effect, spontaneous remission, or simply the passage of time. You'd hear doctors asking, is the patient truly cured or merely temporarily stimulated? Are we seeing genuine physiological change or just a psychological response to a dramatic intervention? These questions, though basic by modern standards, were revolutionary for their time. The public perception of electrotherapy also shifted. What was once a novelty or a parlor trick began to be seen as a legitimate, if radical, medical intervention. Advertisements for electrotherapy clinics appeared in newspapers, promising relief from a range of nervous disorders, including depression, hysteria, and even paralysis. Wealthy individuals might even purchase their own electrotherapy machines for home use, believing they could self-administer their way back to mental well-being. It's like when everyone started buying home exercise equipment, but instead of treadmills, it was electric shock machines. The lack of standardization was a significant problem. There was no universal agreement on the type of current to use: galvanic, Faradic, static, the precise dosage, the duration of sessions, or the placement of electrodes. Each physician might have their own preferred method, making it impossible to compare results across different clinics or studies. It was a bit like trying to bake a cake with a recipe that just says, add some flour and a bit of sugar, and then wondering why every cake tastes different. Without clear instructions, consistency was a pipe dream. A unique and lesser-known detail from this era is the development of electric corsets and electric belts, which were advertised as providing continuous, mild electrical stimulation to the body for a variety of ailments, including nervous exhaustion. These garments, often containing small batteries and electrodes, promise to invigorate the wearer and alleviate symptoms of depression and fatigue simply by being worn throughout the day. Imagine the subtle hum and faint tingling sensation accompanying you as you go about your daily Victorian life, all in the name of mental wellness. While largely ineffective, these devices highlight the pervasive belief in electricity's almost magical therapeutic powers. Moreover, the understanding of the human nervous system was still incredibly limited. While they knew nerves transmitted signals, the intricate electrochemical processes of the brain and the true nature of mental illness were still centuries away from being understood. Physicians were essentially operating in the dark, applying a powerful force to a complex organ without truly knowing its inner workings. The theories about nervous force or vital energy were increasingly seen as speculative rather than scientifically sound. The effectiveness of these treatments was, of course, highly variable and often anecdotal. Some patients reported feeling better, experiencing a temporary lift in their mood or a reduction in their anxiety. Was this a genuine physiological effect, a placebo response, or simply the natural ebb and flow of their condition? It was hard to tell. For every reported success, there were countless others who felt no improvement, or even felt worse. The lack of standardized diagnoses and outcome measures made it nearly impossible to truly assess the efficacy of these early therapies. Skepticism also arose from the observation that many patients, despite undergoing extensive electrotherapy, showed no lasting improvement, or even relapsed shortly after treatment ceased. You might witness this yourself within the asylum walls, seeing fellow patients cycle through periods of temporary lucidity, followed by a return to their melancholic state. These persistent failures, despite the dramatic nature of the treatment, began to erode faith in electricity's supposed curative powers. It's hard to keep believing in a miracle cure when you see it fail repeatedly. The ethical considerations, by modern standards, were often overlooked. Patients, particularly those in asylums or from lower socioeconomic classes, had little agency in their treatment. Consent, as we understand it today, was a foreign concept. You might simply be told that this was your treatment, and you were expected to comply. The power dynamic between physician and patient was heavily skewed, especially when the patient was deemed insane or nervous. It's a grim reminder that medical progress doesn't always go hand in hand with human rights. A unique and lesser-known detail from this period of scrutiny is the emergence of satirical cartoons and popular jokes about electrotherapy. While not scientific critiques, these cultural artifacts reflected a growing public unease and skepticism about the more outlandish claims and the often unpleasant nature of the treatments. Imagine seeing a cartoon depicting a patient comically jolting in a chair, or a doctor with wild, static-charged hair. These caricatures, though humorous, hinted at a deeper questioning of the legitimacy and humanity of such interventions, suggesting that the public, too, was beginning to see through some of the hype. Historians still debate whether the use of electroshock in the Victorian era was a logical, albeit primitive, application of the best available science, or a reckless leap into the unknown, driven by desperation and fascination. The answer is complex. But for you, the patient, it meant being subjected to a treatment that was both cutting-edge and deeply unsettling. The transition from simple electrical experiments to formalized therapy also saw the emergence of specialized practitioners. Electrotherapists, or nerve specialists, began to set up practices, often catering to the wealthy elite who could afford these cutting-edge, if unproven, treatments. These specialists would write books and articles, promoting their methods and sharing their often exaggerated success stories. It was a burgeoning industry, fueled by both genuine scientific curiosity and a healthy dose of entrepreneurial spirit. The ethical concerns also began to be voiced more loudly. The coercive nature of treatment in asylums, the lack of informed consent, and the potential for harm from unregulated currents became points of contention. Some compassionate physicians argued that while electricity might have some stimulating effects, its application should be carefully considered and never used as a form of punishment or control. This early ethical debate laid the groundwork for future discussions about patient rights and medical responsibility. You are witnessing the very beginning of a long and controversial history of using electricity to treat mental illness. These Victorian therapies, crude and often frightening as they were, laid the conceptual groundwork for what would eventually become electroconvulsive therapy (ECT) in the 20th century. While the methods were vastly different, the underlying idea that electricity could somehow alter the brain to alleviate mental distress was born in these dimly lit rooms, amidst the crackle of static and the hum of early dynamos. The shocking journey continues, as the Victorians pushed the boundaries of what was considered acceptable, or even possible, in the treatment of the mind. The rise of other, less invasive forms of therapy also contributed to the skepticism. As the century drew to a close, new psychological theories began to emerge, focusing on talk therapy, hypnosis, and the influence of early life experiences. While still in their infancy, these approaches offered an alternative to purely physical interventions, suggesting that the mind could be treated through dialogue and understanding, rather than just brute force. It's like finally getting a therapist who listens instead of just zapping you. You've witnessed the evolution of electricity from a curious force to a crude, yet formalized therapy for melancholia. The individual sessions in a physician's office, however unsettling, were just one facet of the Victorian approach to mental distress. Now you are about to step into a far more imposing and often terrifying realm, the Victorian asylum. These institutions, built with grand facades, but often harboring grim realities, were the ultimate destination for those whose mental suffering could no longer be managed at home, and where the application of therapy, electric or otherwise, took on a different, more institutionalized character. The academic debate surrounding electrotherapy was fierce. Papers were published, counterpapers were written, and reputations were made and broken based on one's stance on the issue. Some prominent physicians continued to defend electrotherapy, citing their own clinical experiences and anecdotal successes. Others, however, called for more rigorous scientific investigation, for double-blind studies, a concept still in its infancy, and for a clearer understanding of the underlying mechanisms. Imagine the imposing gates of a sprawling complex, often set on the outskirts of a bustling city or nestled in the quiet countryside. The air here is different. It carries a faint, institutional smell, a mix of disinfectant, stale air, and something indefinable, perhaps the lingering scent of despair. High walls, often topped with broken glass or spikes, loom over you, a clear message of containment. You are not entering a place of healing in the modern sense, but a place of segregation, where society's undesirables and unfortunates are kept out of sight and out of mind. It's like being sent to a boarding school, but the curriculum is mostly about confinement, and the teachers have very stern expressions. Historians still debate whether the decline of electrotherapy in the late Victorian period was due to its true ineffectiveness or to the emergence of new treatments and changing medical theories of mental illness. This academic debate highlights the complex interplay of factors that led to the eventual decline of crude Victorian electrotherapy. Was it simply that the treatment didn't work, or were other, yet more appealing, and less invasive options becoming available? The answer is likely a combination of these elements, reflecting the dynamic nature of medical progress. You might observe a gradual shift in practice. While electrotherapy didn't disappear entirely, its more extreme and indiscriminate applications became less common. Physicians began to use it more selectively, perhaps for specific symptoms like paralysis or localized pain, rather than as a general cure-all for melancholia. The initial, almost boundless enthusiasm for electricity as a panacea began to wane, replaced by a more nuanced and often more cautious approach. A common historical fact is that Victorian asylums, while sometimes founded with benevolent intentions, often became overcrowded, understaffed, and focused more on custodial care and control than on genuine therapeutic intervention. You are ushered through heavy wooden doors, perhaps by a stern-faced attendant, into a labyrinth of long corridors and echoing rooms. The sounds are unsettling distant moans, the shuffling of feet, the occasional outburst, and a pervasive, low hum of human distress. The atmosphere is heavy, a stark contrast to the polite society you once knew. The legacy of this period of scrutiny is crucial. It demonstrated the importance of scientific rigor, of questioning assumptions, and of demanding evidence beyond mere anecdote. While the Victorians didn't have the tools to fully understand the brain or the precise effects of electricity, their debates and their skepticism laid the intellectual groundwork for future, more sophisticated investigations. It was a necessary step in the long, winding path towards modern mental health care. A period where the bright, shocking promise of electricity was tempered by the cold, hard light of scientific inquiry. The journey continues as humanity learns to look beyond the immediate jolt and seek deeper, more nuanced understandings of the troubled mind. Your treatment within these walls is a complex, often contradictory affair. While the medical establishment was fascinated by electricity, the daily reality for most asylum residents was far more mundane and often far more brutal. Restraint, both physical and chemical, was common. You might find yourself in a straitjacket or confined to a padded cell, not for your benefit, but for the convenience and safety of the staff. Sedatives, often opium or laudanum, were freely administered to calm agitated patients, turning them into docile, if unresponsive, shadows of their former selves. It's like trying to fix a broken engine by just disconnecting the battery. It stops making noise, but it's definitely not fixed. You've seen the skepticism grow, the scientific community beginning to question the crude electric jolts of the Victorian era. The initial fascination with electricity as a panacea for melancholia has waned, replaced by a more cautious and often critical approach. But the story of electricity and the human mind doesn't end there. Now you're about to witness how these early, often misguided experiments laid the conceptual groundwork for something far more refined, more controlled, and ultimately more effective: the evolution of electrotherapy into modern, targeted treatments for severe mental illness. The theories of mental illness within the asylum system were a mishmash of outdated concepts and nascent scientific ideas. Some physicians still believed in the moral treatment approach, emphasizing routine, fresh air, and light labor. But this was often overshadowed by the sheer volume of patients and the practicalities of managing them. The idea of brain pathology was gaining ground, but without any real understanding of neurochemistry, treatments remained largely symptomatic and often invasive. Imagine the transition not as a sudden leap, but as a slow, deliberate climb. The turn of the 20th century brings with it a burgeoning understanding of neurobiology, albeit still in its infancy. Scientists are beginning to map the brain's intricate pathways to understand the role of neurons and synapses, however vaguely. The crude static generators and induction coils of the Victorians give way to more precise instruments, capable of delivering controlled, measured currents. The air in the clinic is no longer thick with ozone and uncertainty, but with a quiet, clinical professionalism. You are no longer just a subject of a dramatic experiment. You are a patient in a medical facility, where the application of electricity is becoming a calculated, therapeutic intervention. It's like upgrading from a horse-drawn carriage to an early automobile. The fundamental idea of transportation is the same, but the mechanics are vastly different, and hopefully, less jarring. When it came to electrotherapy, its application within asylums varied widely. It wasn't a universal panacea, but rather one tool among many in the asylum physician's limited arsenal. You might be selected for electrical treatment if your melancholia was particularly severe, or if other methods had failed. The equipment would be brought to your ward, or you would be led to a designated electrical room, a place that likely inspired a mixture of fear and a desperate, fleeting hope. A common historical fact is that while crude Victorian electrotherapy faded, the underlying idea of using electricity to influence the brain persisted, eventually leading to the development of electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, in the late 1930s. This was a radical departure from the general stimulation of the past. Instead of trying to re-energize the nerves, ECT involved inducing a controlled seizure, a brief, generalized electrical convulsion, believed to reset the brain's activity. Imagine the sheer audacity of this idea, intentionally causing a seizure to alleviate mental distress. It sounds terrifying. And indeed, early ECT was often administered without anesthesia or muscle relaxants, leading to violent convulsions and a high risk of injury. You might hear the distant cries of patients, or the thud of bodies against restraints, a chilling reminder of the raw power being unleashed. The electric shock administered in the asylum context could be even more unsettling than in a private practice. There was less emphasis on patient comfort or explanation. You might be restrained, perhaps by attendants holding you down, as the electrodes were applied. The current, often from a large, imposing galvanic battery or an induction coil, would be delivered with a grim efficiency. The jolt would be sharp, causing your muscles to contract violently, your body to arch. You might cry out, or simply go rigid, the sensation overwhelming your senses. It's a truly shocking experience, both literally and figuratively. The discovery of ECT was largely accidental, born from observations that individuals with epilepsy sometimes experienced a remission of their psychotic symptoms after a seizure. Two Italian neuropsychiatrists, Ugo Cerletti and Lucio Bini, pioneered the technique, believing that inducing a seizure could shock the brain out of its pathological state. Their early experiments, often on patients with severe mental illness, were fraught with ethical challenges and physical risks. You might witness the immediate aftermath of patients slowly regaining consciousness, disoriented, perhaps with a temporary loss of memory, but sometimes with a profound and immediate lifting of their depressive or psychotic symptoms. A unique and lesser-known detail from Victorian asylum practices is the use of continuous baths combined with electrical currents. Patients would be submerged in large tubs of water for hours, sometimes days, with electrodes placed in the water to deliver a mild, continuous electrical current. The idea was to soothe agitated nerves and promote a state of calm, almost like an extended, unsettling spa treatment. Imagine lying in warm water, the faint hum of electricity permeating your body, the hours stretching endlessly, with only the distant sounds of the asylum for company. It sounds like a bizarre form of sensory deprivation, with an electric twist. The early years of ECT were controversial. The violent nature of the seizures, the risk of fractures and dislocations, and the profound memory loss it often caused, made it a feared and often stigmatized treatment. You might hear hushed conversations among nurses and orderlies, or see the wary glances of other patients, as someone is prepared for the shock. The public perception, often fueled by sensationalized media portrayals, was one of brutality and coercion, reinforcing the negative stereotypes of mental health treatment. It's like watching a black and white horror movie all night, but it's actually happening in the room next door. The asylum environment itself was often detrimental to mental health. The lack of privacy, the monotonous routines, the loss of personal autonomy, and the constant exposure to others in severe distress could exacerbate symptoms rather than alleviate them. You might witness scenes of profound suffering, of individuals lost in their own worlds, or struggling against their restraints. The very air seemed to weigh down on your spirit, making any hope of recovery feel distant and unattainable. However, for patients with severe, intractable depression, catatonia, or acute psychosis, who had failed to respond to any other treatments, ECT often offered a profound and rapid improvement. For these individuals, the benefits, despite the risks and side effects, could be life-saving. You might witness a patient, previously withdrawn and unresponsive, slowly begin to engage with the world again, their eyes regaining a spark, their voice finding its strength. This dramatic efficacy, for a select group of patients, ensured that ECT, despite its controversies, would remain a part of the psychiatric toolkit. The staff in these asylums, while some were genuinely compassionate, were often overworked, underpaid, and poorly trained. The sheer number of patients meant that individual care was minimal. The focus was on management and control, rather than individualized therapy. You might interact more with attendants than with physicians, and their methods could range from gentle persuasion to harsh discipline. It's a stark reminder that even with the best intentions, systemic failures can lead to profound human suffering. A unique and lesser-known detail in the evolution of electrotherapy is the development of sleep therapy or narcosis therapy in the early 20th century, where patients with severe depression were kept in a state of prolonged drug-induced sleep for days or even weeks, sometimes with mild electrical stimulation applied during this period. The idea was to rest the brain and allow it to reset. Imagine being in a perpetual twilight state, drifting in and out of consciousness, your body heavy with sedatives, while a faint electrical current occasionally hums through your limbs. It was a radical, often dangerous approach, highlighting the desperate search for non-pharmacological interventions before the advent of modern antidepressants. Historians still debate whether Victorian mental hospitals were places of last resort for the care of the mentally ill or brutal places of confinement, where treatments such as electric shock were often used as a form of control. This academic debate highlights the complex legacy of these institutions. Were they sanctuaries for the mentally ill, offering the only available care, however flawed? Or were they primarily instruments of social control, where radical treatments were employed to maintain order? The truth is likely a nuanced combination, varying from institution to institution, but the experience for the patient was often one of profound disempowerment. The public perception of asylums was a mix of fear and morbid curiosity. They were often seen as places of last resort, where families sent their loved ones when all other options had failed. Sensationalized accounts in newspapers and popular fiction often depicted them as places of horror, reinforcing public anxieties. You might have heard such stories before your own admission, adding to your dread as you passed through those imposing gates. The mid-20th century brought significant refinements to ECT. The introduction of muscle relaxants like succinylcholine eliminated the violent convulsions, making the procedure much safer and less physically traumatic. Anesthesia ensured that the patient was unconscious and felt no pain during the treatment. The controlled administration of oxygen during the procedure further reduced risks. These advancements transformed ECT from a crude, frightening intervention into a more humane, medically supervised procedure. You would now be gently put to sleep, awaken without the memory of the treatment itself, and experience fewer physical side effects. It's like finally getting a pain-free dental procedure after years of dreading the drill. The legal framework surrounding asylum admissions was also problematic. Individuals could often be committed by family members, sometimes for reasons that had little to do with genuine mental illness, such as challenging societal norms or simply being inconvenient. Once inside, gaining release could be incredibly difficult, often requiring the approval of asylum physicians who had little incentive to discharge patients. You were, in essence, stripped of your legal rights, your fate entirely in the hands of the institution. The understanding of how ECT worked also began to evolve. While the precise mechanisms are still not fully understood, research suggests that it causes widespread changes in brain chemistry, including the release of neurotransmitters, and affects brain connectivity. It's no longer just a shock, but a complex neurobiological intervention. This growing scientific understanding helped to legitimize ECT within the medical community, moving it further away from its Victorian origins and closer to a modern, evidence-based therapy. The Victorian asylum, with its rigid routines, its often brutal methods, and its experimental therapies like electric shock, represents a dark chapter in the history of mental health care. It was a place where the suffering of the mind was met with a mix of genuine, if misguided, medical curiosity and a pervasive desire for social control. You are a silent witness to these practices, experiencing the profound isolation and the unsettling applications of a new, powerful force. The journey through the Victorian approach to depression continues, revealing the complex, often disturbing, realities of institutional life and the desperate search for a cure in an era that barely understood the mind. However, the stigma associated with ECT, largely a legacy of its early brutal applications and sensationalized media portrayals, think One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, persisted for decades. You might still hear whispers, see wary glances, or encounter individuals who view the treatment with fear and suspicion. This societal prejudice, often fueled by misinformation, made it difficult for many patients to accept or openly discuss their treatment, even when it was profoundly beneficial. It's hard to shake off a bad reputation, even when you've completely changed. You've seen the imposing walls of the asylum, felt the chilling jolt of early electrotherapy, and understood the often brutal realities of institutional life. But who, you might wonder, was behind these practices? What was the prevailing medical philosophy that allowed such radical and often terrifying treatments to become commonplace? Now you're about to delve into the minds of the Victorian medical establishment to understand how doctors, armed with burgeoning scientific knowledge and a desperate need for solutions, rationalized and adopted these electric therapies, shaping the fate of countless individuals suffering from mental distress. Historians still debate whether the development of ECT was a necessary step forward in the history of psychiatry, or whether it reflected the failure of medicine to understand and treat mental illness in less invasive ways. This academic debate highlights the enduring ethical and philosophical questions surrounding ECT. Was it a necessary evil, a last resort for severe suffering, that paved the way for better understanding? Or was it a reflection of medicine's limitations? A crude tool used when more nuanced approaches were unavailable? The answer is complex, reflecting the difficult choices faced by physicians in an era of limited options. The development of psychopharmacology in the mid-20th century, with the advent of antidepressants and antipsychotics, offered new, less invasive alternatives for many mental illnesses. This led to a decline in the use of ECT, as medication became the first-line treatment for many conditions. However, for treatment-resistant cases, or when rapid improvement is needed in severe suicidality or catatonia, ECT remains a vital and often life-saving option. You are living in a time of diverse treatment options, where ECT is no longer the only, or even the primary, physical intervention for depression, but a specialized tool for specific, severe conditions. Imagine yourself in a grand lecture hall, perhaps at a prestigious London hospital or a burgeoning medical school. The air is thick with the scent of formaldehyde and ambition. Well-dressed gentlemen with serious expressions and often impressive beards stand at the lectern, expounding on the latest theories of the human body and mind. This isn't the chaotic experimentation of early pioneers. This is the era of systematization, where physicians are striving to elevate medicine from a craft to a true science. They are dissecting cadavers, observing patients, and, crucially, trying to categorize and understand diseases, including those of the mind. It's like watching a TED Talk. But everyone's wearing top hats, and the solutions often involve more sparks than insights. The journey from Victorian electric jolts to modern ECT is a testament to humanity's persistent quest to alleviate mental suffering. It's a story of trial and error, of scientific progress intertwined with ethical dilemmas, and of a gradual shift from crude experimentation to refined, targeted therapy. While the methods and understanding have changed dramatically, the underlying principle that electricity can profoundly influence the troubled mind continues to resonate. You are a witness to this evolution, seeing how the shocking past paved the way for a more nuanced and compassionate future in the treatment of mental illness. A common historical fact is that the Victorian medical establishment increasingly sought physiological explanations for mental illness, moving away from purely moral or spiritual interpretations. The prevailing theory, though still rudimentary, was that mental disorders like melancholia were rooted in physical abnormalities of the brain or nervous system. You'd hear terms like brain congestion, nervous exhaustion, or cerebral anemia. The idea was that the brain, like any other organ, could become diseased, inflamed, or simply tired, leading to symptoms of depression. This shift was monumental. It meant that your suffering wasn't a moral failing, but a medical problem, albeit one they barely understood. And as you drift off to sleep tonight, remember that even in the most terrifying medical stories, there is always a path to understanding and compassion. Let the currents of history gently carry you into a dream world where the complexity of the mind is respected and hope is always present. Let the last images of tonight fade into silence, as the storms of the past fade before the dawn of healing. This physiological perspective made electricity an incredibly appealing tool. If the brain was a physical organ, and if electricity was a powerful physical force, then it stood to reason that electricity could directly influence the brain. Doctors theorized that electric currents could stimulate sluggish nerve cells, improve blood circulation to the brain, or even re-energize a depleted nervous system. They believed it could break up congestions in the brain or restore the balance of nervous energy. It was a grand, sweeping hypothesis, often based more on intuition and observation than on concrete scientific evidence. It's like trying to fix a complex circuit board by just randomly zapping it with a battery, hoping something clicks into place. The adoption of electrotherapy was also driven by a desperate lack of effective alternatives. Opium and laudanum could sedate, but they didn't cure. Moral treatment often failed for severe cases, in a profession increasingly pressured to find tangible solutions. Electricity offered a visible, active intervention. It looked scientific. It produced immediate, if temporary, reactions, and it offered a sense of agency to physicians who often felt helpless in the face of profound mental suffering. It was a shiny new hammer, and every mental illness looked like a nail. Physicians would meticulously document their cases, often with detailed descriptions of the patient's symptoms. The type of electrical current used: galvanic, Faradic, static, the duration of the application, and any observed changes. These case studies, though lacking modern scientific rigor, formed the basis of their understanding and were shared in medical journals and at professional societies. You might find your own case being discussed in such a forum, your symptoms dissected and analyzed, your responses to the shocks noted with a clinical detachment. The concept of nervous force or vital energy was central to many Victorian medical theories, particularly concerning mental health. It was believed that individuals had a finite amount of this energy, and that conditions like melancholia or neurasthenia were caused by its depletion or improper distribution. Electricity, with its perceived ability to generate and transmit energy, was seen as a way to replenish or redirect this vital force. It was a kind of proto-energy drink, but instead of caffeine, it was pure volts. A unique and lesser-known detail from this period is the widespread belief among some Victorian physicians that mental illness, particularly in women, was linked to uterine congestion or other gynecological issues. This led to the application of electrical currents directly to the pelvic region, sometimes internally, with the belief that stimulating these organs would alleviate mental distress. Imagine the sheer invasiveness and absurdity of such a treatment, rooted in deeply misogynistic and scientifically baseless theories. It highlights how far medical understanding had to come, and how easily prevailing social biases could influence clinical practice. The physicians who championed electrotherapy were often pioneers in their field, eager to embrace new technologies and push the boundaries of medical science. They were often charismatic figures, convincing both their peers and the public of the efficacy of their methods. They wrote textbooks, gave public demonstrations, and established specialized clinics, building reputations around their mastery of this powerful new tool. Their enthusiasm, while genuine, often outstripped the actual evidence. The effectiveness of these asylum-based electrotherapies was, again, highly debatable. Any perceived improvements were often temporary, or difficult to distinguish from the effects of other treatments, or simply the natural fluctuations of the illness. For many, the experience was more traumatic than therapeutic, adding to their distress rather than alleviating it. The lack of proper medical records, standardized assessment, and follow-up meant that true efficacy was rarely, if ever, rigorously evaluated. However, not all physicians were convinced. There was a healthy dose of skepticism within the medical community, particularly regarding the more outlandish claims and the lack of consistent results. Debates raged in medical journals and at conferences, with some doctors arguing that the effects were purely psychological, a placebo effect, though the term wasn't yet in common use, or that the risks outweighed the benefits. This internal academic debate, though not always public, reflected the nascent scientific method at work. Questioning and challenging new ideas, you find yourself in a world draped in heavy fabrics and even heavier societal expectations. It's the mid-19th century, a time of unprecedented industrial growth, scientific discovery, and rigid social codes. Yet, beneath the veneer of progress and propriety, a pervasive sense of gloom, often referred to as melancholia, nervous debility, or vapors, settles like a London fog. You feel it yourself, a persistent heaviness in your chest, a lack of interest in the bustling world outside your window. The vibrant colors of life seem muted, the lively chatter of the drawing room muffled. It's not just sadness, it's an all-encompassing ennui, a profound weariness that saps your energy and dims your very spirit. It's like being perpetually stuck on a Monday morning, but without the promise of a weekend. Historians still debate whether the widespread adoption of electrotherapy in the Victorian era was evidence of the progressive thinking of the medical profession or of a desperate search for solutions to intractable mental illnesses. This academic debate highlights the complex motivations behind the adoption of electrotherapy. Was it a sign of genuine scientific progress, a willingness to experiment and innovate? Or was it a reflection of the profound helplessness physicians felt in the face of mental illness, leading them to grasp at any promising new technology? However poorly understood, the truth likely lies in a nuanced blend of both. But for you, the patient, it meant being subjected to a treatment that was both cutting-edge and deeply unsettling. The professionalization of medicine also played a role. As medical schools became more formalized and licensing became more common, there was a drive to establish scientific treatments that distinguished legitimate practitioners from quacks. Electrotherapy, with its impressive machines and seemingly scientific basis, offered a veneer of legitimacy that appealed to many in the medical establishment. It was a way to appear modern, progressive, and effective, even if the actual mechanisms remained a mystery.